The Civil War had ended 3 years prior, but its echoes still lingered across the South, like ghosts that refused to rest. On the outskirts of Baldwin County, where the land stretched flat and cotton bloomed heavy under the sun, stood Whitmore Manor Regal, proud and untouched by ruin. It was a house of marble floors, wide porches and towering white columns. But more than anything, it was a house of silence. Grayson Whitmore, the last heir of the Whitmore name, was a man carved from discipline and steel. At 32, he was already a legend, the richest cotton baron in 3 counties, tall, rigid, with eyes the color of a storm about to break. He ran his estate like he ran his emotions, tight-fisted, controlled and unyielding to the men who worked his fields. He gave no more than a nod to those who crossed him. In business his words were few and final. One morning, seated behind his broad mahogany desk, he signed a letter without looking up and said plainly, "Double the overseer's pay if he delivers by Friday. If not, he's gone." The clerk nodded without speaking. No one spoke more than they had to around Grayson Whitmore. That same morning, a modest cart creaked up the gravel path toward the manor. Seated at its edge was Isabella Clark, a young woman of 25 with worn boots, a threadbare dress and eyes full of quiet fire. She was not a woman raised in finery. She came from a small cottage in harder days, her hands shaped by work, her soul by sacrifice. Her mother had fallen ill during the war, and Isabella had worked since she could walk to keep her alive. Now she looked at the mansion ahead and whispered under her breath, "Mama, I hope I'm doing the right thing." Her voice was barely louder than the wind, but it carried a weight heavier than the satchel beside her. Inside, Miss Adeline, the housekeeper, met her with a gaze that had seen many girls come and go. She adjusted her spectacles and spoke sharply, her tone brisk and dry. "You're here to clean, nothing more, nothing less. Speak only when spoken to. Stay out of the master's way. He don't take kindly to strangers sniffing about." Isabella nodded silently, her back straight. She didn't flinch, as Miss Adeline handed her a pail and a bundle of rags, nor when the grand double doors closed behind her, with the finality of a locked vault. Outside, the wind shifted in the cotton. Inside, Isabella took her first step across the marble floor of a house ruled by silence, wealth, and one man's buried grief. She did not yet know the baron who walked these halls, and he did not yet see the woman who would undo him. Grayson Whitmore was a creature of routine. He rose before dawn, took his coffee alone, and spent most days astride a chestnut stallion riding the length of his fields, inspecting crops and issuing orders with court precision. The fewer words spoken, the better. He preferred being outside, away from the echoing halls of the manor, away from the ghosts he never acknowledged. He was not a man fond of surprises, but that afternoon the skies betrayed him. Storm clouds thickened like smoke, and thunder cracked across the hills with the sharpness of cannon fire. Rain chased him home, soaking his coat and darkening the path before him. Without ceremony he swung open the door and stepped inside, trailing rain behind him. The grand hallway greeted him with its usual hush, until he noticed a figure kneeling on the marble floor. There in the center of the hall, her back to him, was a young woman polishing the tile. She moved with careful rhythm, her gloved hands methodical, her focus unwavering. She did not hear the door open, nor the footsteps, but she felt it, the shift in the air, the sudden weight of a presence behind her. And then his voice broke the stillness, low and sharp as a blade. "Who are you?" Startled, she jerked upright, nearly dropping the cloth in her hand. Her voice came soft but steady. I'm Isabella, sir," the new maid, Miss Adeline said, but he cut her off before she could finish. "I don't care what she said." His gaze lingered on her longer than necessary. Eyes narrowed, not in interest, but in calculation. A flicker of something passed through them quick as lightning, then vanished. He added coldly, "Don't let me find you kneeling in the middle of my hall again." And with that he turned, boots clicking against polished stone, and disappeared into the next room. Isabella stood there for a breath, the cloth still in her hand, her chest rising and falling beneath the stiff fabric of her dress. Her cheeks flushed not with shame, but with defiance. She dared not speak aloud. But she didn't retreat, she didn't crumble. She bent again, picked up the rag, and returned to work. Above her the storm rolled across the roof in low, growling waves. Inside the silence returned. Yet something had changed. The master of the house had noticed her, and no matter how much he tried to forget, she had already taken root. The days that followed returned to silence, but not the same kind. It was no longer the unbroken hush of still air, but something else, something softer, almost curious. Isabella moved through the manor like a whisper, present but never intrusive. She scrubbed steps before the sun rose, folded linens with care, and dusted books he hadn't opened in years. Grayson pretended not to notice, but he did. He noticed when she replaced the wilting flowers in the vase. By the stairwell he noticed when the piano bench, untouched for a decade, sat slightly ajar, as if someone had dared play it. He noticed the faintest scent of lavender soap left behind. When she passed by one morning, Isabella entered the study to dust, a room no one entered without permission. But Miss Adeline had sent her, and she obeyed. Grayson wasn't there. The room held the stillness of long-kept secrets. She moved quietly, her cloth trailing along the shelves and desk. But then she paused. An opened letter lay on the desk. The edges worn, the handwriting neat. One name stood out, repeated in elegant loops across the page: Charlotte. She didn't mean to read it. She looked away almost instantly. But in that brief moment, something unspoken passed between the words and her chest. She was about to retreat when a voice like thunder rolled in behind her. "Do you make a habit of snooping?" Grayson stood in the doorway. One brow lifted, arms crossed every inch. The cold master of the house again. Isabella straightened instantly. Her voice came quiet, measured. "No, sir. I was just cleaning. I saw the letter. I didn't mean to pry." His gaze didn't soften. "Then don't," he said simply. There was a pause. He could have said more. She could have explained. But instead he added, his voice lower this time. "You may dust my house, Miss Clark, but my past is not among the items to be polished." And with that he stepped past her and into the room, ending the moment with a finality that stung. That night Grayson stood by the parlor window, bourbon in hand, though he hadn't taken a single sip. Rain pressed gently against the glass. Somewhere down the corridor, a soft melody echoed, hummed. Not played. He knew that voice. The same one that had stood firm beneath his scorn. The same one that filled the hallways, when no one else dared make a sound. He closed his eyes, the hum lingering like a memory. And though he said nothing aloud, the storm behind his ribs began to shift. The storm came quickly, without the usual warning of a southern summer sky. One moment the air hung heavy with heat. The next thunder cracked across the cotton fields like a whip. Rain battered the windows of Whitmore Manor. Candles flickered in their holders. The house, so often silent, now pulsed with the sound of nature's fury. In the drawing-room Isabella moved calmly, lighting sconces along the walls. She worked with quiet precision, though her eyes flicked to the windows with each flash of lightning. She did not startle easily, but storms, she had learned long ago, were best watched rather than ignored. She didn't expect to find Grayson there, standing by the unlit fireplace, half-shadowed in amber glow. He had entered so silently that only the shifting of his coat caught her attention. For a moment neither spoke. Then he asked, his voice softer than usual, "You're not afraid of thunder?" She shook her head without turning toward him and replied, almost as an afterthought, "Not of thunder, sir." He took a step closer, arms folded loosely, his tone laced with quiet curiosity. "Of what then?" She paused, her gaze lingering on the candle flame before answering. "Of silence. The kind that settles in a house, where no one speaks unless they have to." That answer caught him, not like a slap, but like a slow breath held too long. He said nothing in return. A sudden gust burst one of the tall windows open. Rain slashed through the air. Without hesitation, Isabella ran to it. Trying to wrest the pane closed against the wind. Grayson was at her side in a heartbeat. His hand met hers on the latch. For a moment they both stood there, pressed close by necessity. Eyes locked by accident, the storm howled. But inside a different kind of thunder rose. She felt his breath, he saw the raindrops shimmer along her cheek. Neither moved, neither spoke. Not until he blinked hard and pulled back. His voice returned to its usual guarded tone as he murmured, "Go to bed, Miss Clark." And though she hesitated, her voice was clear when she finally replied, "Yes, sir." She stepped away, candle in hand, casting shadows behind her. Grayson remained, hand still gripping the window latch, as though holding on to something slipping beyond his reach. The storm passed, but the air in the manor remained thick. Not with rain, but with something less visible, more volatile. Grayson felt it in every hallway. Isabella felt it in every glance. Neither spoke of the moment by the window, but it lingered like the scent of smoke long after the fire has died. One morning, as Grayson stepped onto the second-floor balcony, coffee in hand, he looked down and saw her. Isabella was in the courtyard, her face turned toward the sun, her laugh light, effortless, floating up like bird-song. Standing beside her was Thomas, a newly hired field hand, tall and easy in his smile. Thomas handed her a bundle of firewood, said something too quiet to hear, and tipped his hat. She thanked him, still smiling. Grayson watched it all in silence, his hand tightening around the cup until porcelain cracked. Later that day, Isabella passed him in the hall carrying folded linens. He stopped her with a single low sentence. "Seems you've taken to socializing during work hours." She blinked, surprised. "Excuse me," she asked, her voice polite but weary. He stepped closer, his tone cool. "The field hand, Thomas. Is that where your attention lies now?" There was a pause, heavy, sharp. Her chin lifted slightly as she answered. "He brought firewood," I said. "Thank you, that's not socializing. It's decency." Grayson's jaw tensed, his voice rising. "It's familiarity. This is not a village dance. Miss Clark, this is my house." Her voice held steady and clear. "And I work in it. I haven't forgotten my place, Mr. Whitmore. But maybe you've forgotten that kindness doesn't cost a thing." A silence deeper than thunder rolled between them. He stared at her, truly stared. Not in anger, but in some tangled thing he didn't know how to name. Then, without another word, he turned and walked away. Isabella stood there for a moment, linen bundle pressed to her chest, her breath tight in the kitchen. She folded the cloths with trembling fingers. Upstairs, Grayson poured a drink he didn't want, and left it untouched on the desk. Neither of them knew exactly what had been said, but both knew something had been wounded, and neither was ready to admit what it was. Days passed, and though the sun rose and chores continued, nothing felt as it had before. The air between Grayson and Isabella had cooled into something brittle, easy to break, impossible to mend with silence alone. She no longer paused near the drawing-room. He no longer lingered in the hall. The warmth that once flickered in their shared glances had dimmed to ash one evening, as Isabella made her way down the corridor to her room. She heard voices from the study. Grayson's voice clipped and low. She paused unintentionally just outside the door. Inside, he spoke to a visitor, but his words carried, "I don't care what the staff think." He said, "She's a maid." Nothing more. The words hit her like cold wind. She did not flinch, did not cry, but she turned, walked silently back to her room, and began folding her dresses into her canvas bag. Before dawn she was gone. From her bed her boots echoed softly, as she walked through the kitchen one last time, leaving her room key beside a folded note. She paused in the grand hall, glancing up at the portrait of the Whitmore family above the stairs. Faces stiff, eyes distant, a lineage of proud isolation. She did not belong here, not among ghosts. She was halfway down the long drive when Miss Adeline appeared on the porch. Arms folded, her voice a mix of challenge and concern. "You sure about this girl?" Isabella didn't stop walking, but her voice floated back quiet and clear. "Yes, ma'am." The housekeeper narrowed her eyes. "He's a hard man, but he's not heartless." Isabella's reply came without hesitation. "No, he just keeps it buried too deep for anyone to reach." And with that she disappeared down the lane, beneath a sky just beginning to turn gold. Grayson found the note sometime near midday. The kitchen felt too still, the house too quiet. He picked up the folded paper with cautious hands and read her words, written in careful, even script. "I was not made for silence. Mr. Whitmore, I hope someday you won't be either." He stood there a long time, the note trembling slightly between his fingers. He did not speak, he did not move. But for the first time in years, he felt. Grayson Whitmore had faced failing crops, blood-soaked ledgers, and the slow decay of everything his father had built. But nothing undid him. Like the quiet that followed Isabella's departure, the manor didn't feel silent anymore. It felt hollow. The scent of lavender was gone. The piano remained closed. The linens on the stair rail were no longer folded just so. He held her note for hours without realizing it. Read it again and again. "I was not made for silence. Mr. Whitmore, I hope someday you won't be either." He murmured the words aloud like a prayer or a wound. And suddenly the study could no longer hold him. Miss Adeline stood at the front door, as he came storming down the stairs, coat in hand, fire in his eyes. She raised one eyebrow, arms crossed. "Well, it's about time," she muttered as he passed her without pause. He stopped only once to ask, breath tight, "Where did she go?" The old woman didn't hesitate. The Clark farm, North Road, just past the willow grove. And then he was gone, mounting his horse, with the urgency of a man chasing something more important than pride. The ride was long, the road a blur. He passed fields that once belonged to friends, now buried, past homes that bore war's scars. But he didn't stop. Not until he reached the edge of a clearing and saw the crooked fence, the weather-worn roof, and the woman he had tried and failed not to need. Isabella stood in the garden. Sleeves rolled, her hands dirt-streaked from tending seedlings. She looked up, surprise widening her eyes as he dismounted and strode toward her. He didn't offer a speech, he offered the truth. His voice was low, unsteady. "I've been silent too long about everything I was taught. That feeling made you weak. That letting someone in meant giving something up." She stood still, breathing shallow. He stepped closer, his coat damp with sweat and travel. "But you never asked for anything. You just gave light laughter, decency, and I didn't know how to hold that." He swallowed hard, then added, "I don't want you back as a maid, Isabella. I want you beside me in that house, in that life, if you'll still have me." She didn't speak, not right away. She only stepped forward, reached up with a soil-streaked hand, and placed it softly over his chest. And in the hush of the willow grove, she whispered what he'd been waiting to hear. "Then speak more often, Grayson Whitmore. Let your house be filled with something other than silence." And for the first time in years, he smiled, small, real, and full of everything he'd never dared to say. Spring unfurled across Baldwin County in slow, golden strokes. The cotton had begun to bloom, shy and white against the green, like hope arriving late but sure. The trees were full again, and the air smelled of rain and something softer, something new. Whitmore Manor still stood as grand as ever, its columns tall and white against the sky. But inside, the house had changed. The silence was gone, there was music now. Sometimes the soft notes of a piano, sometimes just a hum echoing from the kitchen. The hearth burned warm in rooms once kept cold, and Grayson Whitmore no longer passed his days alone. One morning, beneath the willow trees where she had once told him to speak, Grayson stood in a pressed coat, a small velvet box in his hand. Isabella walked toward him through the grass, her hair pinned up, the wind playing gently at her skirt. She paused when she saw what he held. He didn't kneel. That wasn't his way. He simply looked at her and said quietly, "You've changed everything, Isabella. without asking for anything in return. He opened the box. Inside was a ring simple, elegant, with a sky-colored stone set in an old band. It was my mother's, he said, but it never felt like it belonged to anyone until now. She smiled, eyes glinting with something that made his breath catch. Then put it on me, Mr. Whitmore, she said gently, before you change your mind. He slid the ring onto her finger, and for a moment neither moved. Then, with all the careful reverence of a man who had learned not to rush, Love Grayson leaned in and kissed her. Not with hesitation, not with apology, but with truth. And so beneath the willow trees that at once heard only wind, two people stood wrapped in each other's silence. This time not cold or empty, but full and whole. The cotton baron was no more. In his place stood a man in love, and beside him, a woman who had taught him how to speak without raising his voice. Give me this same story in 4 parts and each part in separate document.